First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone here today for the alternator chat that we're having with Aileen Bahmanipour and Godfre Leung, who Aileen has her exhibition Wasting Techniques currently at the Alternator Centre for Contemporary Art in Kelowna, BC until March 13th. Godfre wrote the interpretive essay for the show, and we're happy to have them here in conversation tonight. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Alternator is artist-run center based in Kelowna, BC, and we have been around since 1989, for just over 30 years. And we support artists of all different stages and elements in or stages in their career, and of all different disciplines. And in our professional exhibition spaces, including the main and the window gallery, we tend to program artists who are working in very experimental means and mediums. And Eileen's work, we're excited to hear about it and have some discussions around it and share it with the alternator community a bit more. I would also like to acknowledge that the alternator is located on Silk Territory, and I'm also coming to you from Silk Territory, which includes Kelowna, BC. We do present our work here in Silk Territory, and we are thankful to be able to do that. A little bit about the Alternator Chat series. This is the 7th of 8 that we've had in the series. And this is our first artist talk that we've done as part of the series. And so we're grateful to be able to share some of that programming with you. For those of you in Kelowna, if you would like to check out Eileen's show, you can definitely do that. We're in the Rotary Centre for the Arts, and we're generally open Tuesdays through Fridays, 11 to 6, and Saturdays, 11 to 4. So with that, I think I'll pass it over to Aileen and Godfre. And if folks do have any questions, I should just say, feel free to throw them into the chat window, and we'll make sure that they get addressed through conversation. We'll make sure that if there are any things you want to ask, that they are addressed in the talk. Thank you again. I'll hand it over to you, Aileen and Godfre.
Thank you, Melanie. It's happy to be here. I also very thankful of the Alternative Centre for Contemporary Arts giving me this opportunity to exhibit this work, and also today to have a talk, unfold some aspects of it, and maybe have a discussion or talk about it. Thanks to Godfre for accompanying me here today. It's great to have you as well. So I think wasting technique was a little bit different for me from the body of the work or the creative process I used to go through it. And it happened through a very, very long period of time. Like I stopped at some point, distracted, and start working on something else, and then go back to it. And then, so it was a project that I stopped and disturbed several times. And it's again one of the projects that I question it a lot, that not only this work, but what I expect from image making, or what I expect from art, what I want the image, what are the things that I want an image do for me, or in general art making or image making process. And I think my creative process is also coming from a kind of a need, a personal need, a psychological need for making something in a specific way with a specific material. So I think this project was also answered for a couple of all those needs that I was feeling for. But I think the question of, again, what I want from an image or what I want from a piece of art to do for me was something important for me to take the risks and not necessarily have answer for everything through this project. And like the process of image making for this project and maybe for my recent works is mostly through image breaking. So I want to making an image through breakage of an image and see what happened if I constantly disturb your attention, so you don't go with the narrative of the image. You don't go with the illusion of the image. I constantly remind you that this is a material. This is a material that is sitting on a piece of paper and acetate, a surface. And this constant reminder that don't go with the image and narrative and the illusion of the image, but this is the material, and this is the ground of the image. It's becoming more important for me. And I think the reason for that is the way we become more self-conscious about the way that we look at things in the specific images. And the other thing is that maybe through that process of looking at that image with that self-awareness, avoiding that illusion, avoiding that narrative, our choice or the way that we look at the image become more subjective and less dictated by the image. So these are the questions that I have. They're not resolved, but these are certain concerns that I have through image making project, and basing art technique was also a response to these concerns and questions that I have in image making, my relations to images and the way that I collect them, manipulate them, accumulate them, etc. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe I just want to pause to get some questions and maybe we change the direction. And if not, maybe I just continue with some of the notes that I have to share.
Well, Aileen, I think, the first thing I want to ask is, the work is so different between when I saw it in your studio and seeing it over Zoom now. And I understand that the technical apparatus was somewhat impromptu, or was a way to get around the problem that not a lot of people could be in the gallery at the same time. But I'd just love to hear more about that process, about how you sort of built the work into a machine that documents itself.
That's interesting. So the idea of the camera was something that is added before, but before the COVID and like the idea of like involving the zoom or that lens, it was mostly so my plan was I want a highly saturated image that it's kind of hard to see a single thing because everything is constantly blocking each other to the point that it's like you can see that much. And then there is this machine that is constantly like once in a while is washing it. So it's kind of teasing my problem with the diagrams and the figure and figurative images and abstraction. And also the machines and the diagrams that I'm thinking about and the order. So I'm thinking about the diagrams in a way that I think about governments. They govern things. They are designed to govern things and they don't care about your rules. You have to adapt yourself or your thing or your system with their rules. And if it doesn't match, it will go to the waste or nothing will be produced. So there was this kind of interesting ideas that I have, thinking about the diagrams and the machine. So that was how I wanted to connect it to this kind of stupid machine, or non-functional, or a stupid functional machine that is constantly actually washing that diagrams of machines that use in extraction. And then after the COVID and the closure of galleries and other places, we were thinking about, okay, how are we going to show this work? And that was the point that I decided, okay, we have this screen. And I was also thinking about like the acetate, the transparency, the perspective, the viewpoint, and all these things. And I saw that, okay, what if this screen, this frame now dictate the viewpoint, these two become one thing. So I think that's how I try to navigate through these certain things, like the diagrams or the drawings, the machine, and the iPad, or maybe a third lens. It was more kind of a triangle or a relationship between the viewpoints and how we can look at the image, and how would be our interaction and relationship through or within that relationship of looking at something.
I'm kind of curious, actually. You know, when I've seen it, and I have to admit that I've only seen the parts where it shoots. You know, I go to the Google Drive that you have, and you know, I find that moment at like 57 minutes in. But I guess one thing I was trying to think about when I was writing it, and maybe this is a silly question, but I was trying to think about which is the ideal point of view, which, and actually, no, I admit that's a silly question to talk about when it's a reversible and transparent work. But I say this because when you look from the machine's point of view, or the spinning machine's point of view, that's the drawing as I saw it in your studio, and that's the front of the drawing where everything is facing the right way, I think. But it's so much more interesting to see it from behind. And I don't know, I don't have a particularly interesting thought about that other than that strikes me as interesting.
The idea of like having a certain viewpoint, or what's the best spot to look at an image, like traditionally speaking, like we should stand in front of a painting, mostly at the
Right.
center of it, to be able to look at an image in an ideal situation. And I think in the point of my practice, when I start folding the acetate and kind of doing such interruption and disturbance to the narrative of the image, or narrativity of the image, I kind of tease out that kind of perfect viewpoint, where to look at, how to look at that image. So it's become a question, which kind of I take the answer out of that question and just this is the question and I want to have it. And then for the wasting technique, at the same time that the installation is pretty much, I want everything exactly on one line, like perfectly. Like I wanted, like if you stand on behind the iPad that has like a foreground view, I wanted like a pipe and the iPad behind it be all at the same line perfectly. But that doesn't mean that that's an ideal viewpoint. Still, that viewpoint is a question. Is it from the iPad behind the sheet that you can see the washes better? Is it the one from the front that you can see the shoots better? Is it for the people who have the chance to be in the space and witness the entire process on both angles and everything? They could go around. Like, what's the actual viewpoints? And more than I'm not that much interested to find the answer for it, while I want to really twist it and like make that answer to be very, very far from the question. And I think through that kind of play and teasing out, I'm also emphasizing again on our act of looking at things, how we do it, and just questioning it. Yeah.
I guess the other thing that struck me, and I'm just thinking about, while I was writing about the work, I think the day before I was supposed to turn it in, you sent the documentation because you had finished installing. And then the next day I rewrote the middle section. And maybe this goes to this, it goes to this question about, how we're supposed to see this. Maybe not literally like where you're supposed to stand for the best view, but being that I think a lot of this project exists over Zoom or in documentation, it's such a lovely drawing. And yet, not being able to go to Kelowna to see it in person, all I'm seeing is the disruption, and really all I'm looking for is the disruption. And I think the thing that is most palpable or visceral or, I don't know, striking about my experience of this work is actually the sound. I mean, it's also it's also the substrate as it gets hit and it sort of waves around a little bit, and you're watching the streaks go down. But the sound, and this is why the reverse shot is for me the good one, because you hear it, because I think the iPad or the microphone is closer, and so you hear it better. But I guess the reason I'm asking this is because I had written so much about the diagrams and the drawing itself, and in the final essay, there's actually very little about that, because after seeing the documentation, that no longer seemed to me to be the point, or at least it's not what I felt like I could talk best or I could write best about. But I would also, as you talk about the image and breaking the image and all of this. I also wanted you to talk about, or I also want to ask you about the image itself, the drawing, the technique of drawing, and how laborious it is for you, and how exquisite the drawings and the composition and all of that are. Which I think, which is the thing that you're destroying, and the thing that gets eclipsed here, but also is a very valuable thing.
There is a joy in this disruption. I don't know. I feel like that I'm okay putting that energy and labor. I need it. For some reason, my body needs it. I have to do it. And then there is a joy in destroying it in a way. But what comes through that disruption for me, that the act or the process of image making can give that to me. And maybe it is a way of wasting technique in a way, but I'm wondering what it offers me, that the process of building doesn't necessarily do that for me. There is a relief. There is also questioning about the act of image making and disruption of it, and the self-awareness and loss of question around it. So that's about that. I really don't have a clear answer or a theory behind. It's not a theory. It is a relief. It is a joy, and there is a kind of intellectual process for it for me, that it's going on. It keeps changing from one project to the other project. But I'm curious about not necessarily an image. It could be an image, but what comes after an image get disturbed? What is it? And what is that thing that could offer me as a first audience of it, as a first visitors of it? What happens, like I'm thinking about this kind of relationship between ground of the image and the image for a while, and how these two could come into a productive conversation. So this is an ongoing process. And then you've mentioned in your writing, and we have talks about it, why diagrams, where is that obsessions come from? And yeah, as we talked about, it comes from a certain filtration, a certain separation, that diagrams at a certain time in my life were pretty much available images around me in comparison to other images that I couldn't have access to them. So I had this material, and so that, okay, what can I do with them? So, and they were capable of doing certain things for me. They were capable of accepting and embracing certain concepts that I wanted to. I'm not saying that they're telling a story, but there is certain narrativity into them, which I was very interested in it, like the process, do this, do that. And that's how also the idea of the manuals come after, like how to do things. That kind of idea of teaching you how to do things. And it's a certain interesting relationships that is happening. And the way that I mentioned that I think about diagrams and machines, like machinery diagrams, as governments and governmental system, the way that they produce things, the way that they waste things, these are interesting relationships that I'm discovering through that. And then my notion of diagrams is not, it's a little bit tricky. Like I can show you some images, what I think about diagrams. Let's see if I share my screen with you. So it's just a layered thing. So at some point I believe you should be able to see this. Mm-hmm. Like this is a diagram of a boiling machine. There is a kind of a telling in it, show you how it works or how certain elements works in it. So on one hand, this is the first kind of notion of the diagrammatic images that I'm interested to and I'm working on. But on the other hand, there are also some diagrammatic images, and this is very personal, subjective way of thinking about those diagrammatic images. It is very arguable, but as an example, I was thinking about these works of Picabia, which is not diagrams, but when I'm thinking about diagrammatic image, they don't necessarily have to be diagram. What I'm thinking about is that they're kind of a residue or a document of a thinking process on a surface. Again, can be very arguable. But it's different. Like I'm not really into expressionist like way of mark making, but it's just a way of mark making on a surface, on the ground of the image that could document a process of thinking. The other thing that I was thinking about is also the unhappy, what was the name of the work of Duchamp? The Unhappy Ready-Made, that it was a mathematic or geometry book that he gave it as a gift to his sister and have to hang it on the balcony and let the wind kind of solve the problems. So the way that I think about the diagram and diagrammatic images and relationships is kind of a little bit tricky. So I'm playing with these notions and way of thinking about diagrammatic images and what are they capable of.
It feels like, and maybe this is also just, me knowing, or you haven't told me that these images sort of come from the ether of the internet. I'm curious about this impulse in your work to make them material before, I guess, you destroy them and make them immaterial again. There's, when you say the ground of the image, I sense that you mean, like the literal material that that becomes like the substrate of your drawing, not, like the background versus the foreground, or, white versus, figure versus ground. And I guess I'm curious about that that impulse. Why do these things that maybe nobody will ever print out and they'll only ever see on their phones or on their screens or on some other kind of device, why does so much of your work invested in making them concrete, or making them into a thing that you can hold before you then do something to that thing that you can hold?
Human diagrams.
Yeah.
So I guess they were so available. I can't have as many of them. They're so available. Like whatever I search, which recently I'm more like deliberate and conscious about what I'm Googling, what I'm searching for. But even before, like before this period, I was just amazed by how much I can have. I was just like a hoarder. I could have like millions of them. Like I could have just asked for the diagrams of an egg breaker machine and I could have like 2 million diagrams of it. And that was like, oh, like it's like endless, like open source of information that I could have without any kind of limitation. So that was something interesting that is also, it's kind of welcoming. I could have as much as I wanted without any end. So that was one thing. And the other thing was that maybe like I'm not necessarily expert in the field of a science that I'm searching for, like extraction tools and stuff. So I'm mostly like, the way that I look at them is also a little bit like formally, visually. And the way that I choose at them is just which one is appealing to me, which one looks interesting for me. How can I play with them? How can I? And it's easy to juxtapose them. It's easy to mix them, combine them to make something totally like new. And it doesn't have to necessarily like, in a way, like I'm not worried about if this in real, if this machine gonna work or not. Like I'm just playing with the visual material of it, and it's very flexible. It's very open to whatever I want to do with it. So there's kind of, again, freedom that I have with working with these visual materials. These are also the materials and the visual information that's considered to be rational, and doing something irrational to them, it's something appealing. And then there are certain aspects of it. It's also like, as I mentioned, like I don't have the struggle of thinking about figurative and abstract art. It's kind of both at the same time. It's like its own field for itself. I think these are some of the important things that keep me working with these sort of images, with this specific like visual way of representing information.
I wonder if this is somewhat of like a generational question, or maybe generational impulse. And maybe this has something to do with like what Hito Steyerl calls like the poor image. But part of me starts thinking about when people got scanners, or when all the art history TAs got all their PDFs and just put them on the internet, and we could download any and everything, and all the great art books that we could never afford to buy. We couldn't afford to buy those catalogs, but we would have them in PDF form. And there was a time when I was a student when I would actually have them and to read them better, because reading screens all the time hurts your brain. But I would print these things out, and there was a certain point, and I can't remember how long ago that was, where I gave up. There was just too much. I'd hoarded too much, and I couldn't print them out anymore. I think it was actually the same with like MP3s. Once upon a time, eventually your hard drive got big enough that you could just, endlessly hoard these things. But I wonder if that, in the way that somebody like Yuta Sterile, talks about the digital shift and the sort of free floating circulation or the intangible circulation of images is at play here. And I think, and maybe I'm stressing this also because, from, being not in Kelowna right now, my access to this is of course also digital, that you've made it solid, you've destroyed it, and then you're documenting that destruction again as a circulating digital image, which you are also very carefully archiving in these very, very long video files on a Google Drive.
Yeah, interesting. But it's, I guess maybe it's the first time that the cycle is happening in my work, that like the work itself is kind of archiving and documenting itself. But again, like the quality of the videos is like, it's poor image. They're like easy to be stored. And like I gradually, like I had to like download them, archive them, and just delete it because I'm worried if I run out of the space in the recording space in the Zoom. So there's kind of like this kind of being worried about what if I run out of this space, and the way that I care or document the work and then try to maintain this project through the time. Or the other thing was also the way that I decide, okay, how many times during the day the machine should work. And it's like, I wasn't sure at the beginning, should it be like once in an hour, once every 3 hours? And like I said, you know what? So once in a day, just make it slow, make it like, again, that kind of wordness. Like, what if you wash off too early or too not? So there is kind of a way of like, I don't know, care is a good word or no, but it's definitely has something to do with the maintenance of the work and the shaping of it and how I could stretch it in a way that worked the best with the time that I have. But yeah, there's something about that kind of the quality of the image that is manageable and affordable for me. And again, it might be back to like the way that I get my sources of images, the diagrams, they're easy to be stored. I could easily have like thousands of them, just the way that is manageable and affordable for me. And like same thing with the storage. Yeah, I think that's a good and accurate point that you mentioning about it. And again, like you also like the quality of the Zoom, like it's not about the camera of the iPads. Like they might be able to capture a higher quality images, but it's about the quality of the camera of the app of the Zoom. And this is the quality of the Zoom that kind of dictates itself to the work that we can look at through the Zoom. Which was interesting for me when I couldn't tell before the installation, and when that happened I said that, oh, so we can't really see the work. and that was okay for me. Like I said that, okay. Yeah, so I don't know if I answer your question or not, but like, yes, I'm dealing with this different quality and the weight of images, and working with the poor images give me definitely this freedom to move around, to hoard, to store, to manipulate, to archive, and maybe to recycle them. Yeah.
I had a point, it just escaped me because that was so good.
I have a question, if I could jump in, just
Please.
around when I did have a question that I was going to ask around thinking about your timing and why you picked once a day. But just, I guess, maybe more of a comment around from the gallery perspective and being in there. It's a really interesting balance between anticipation and urgency that's kind of happening in the gallery, where it's there's folks who are coming and they might be there 15 minutes early, or they might be rushing there and get there like 10 seconds before. There's people who show up a few minutes late, and they have to come back again, and it's just created this really interesting flow of folks in and out of the gallery, and a really I just wanted to throw in my little comment there, just um based on observations in the gallery. Sorry for interrupting, Godfrey.
I'm super happy to hear how it is in real life. I don't know, Mujan, do you have anything to add about being there and also maintaining this machine? I understand.
Yeah, actually, that idea of urgency, I document it every day that I'm in, and I get nervous every time. And I'm not sure why. I just always, for some reason, I'm just like anticipating it going off. And there's been a few days where I've missed the photo because it happened so fast.
Me too.
And
Sorry.
even when I'm taking the photo, I'm not looking at it. I'm looking at it through the screen of the camera. So I've actually never seen it like in real time.
Right.
I've always seen it through the screen. So I'm hoping one day someone will just like come and I can get them to take the photo so then I can actually watch it happen. But yeah, this idea of this like urgency and this like nervousness, and also because it's such a complex machine, I'm always scared that I'm gonna break it or someone's gonna break it. Um, and I did actually want to ask you, Aileen, about the machine. There's something so striking about that machine that you've created, and just like being able to see the inside workings of it as well. And I wanted to ask, like, what was the process of building that machine?
Great. Thanks, Mujan. I feel a little bit sorry.
Don't worry. Keeps it interesting for us over here.
But it's thanks for sharing. Like it's, you kind of add another layer to the work that you never could actually witness, and you always seen it through the lens of the camera.
Yeah.
So the speeding machine story, we built it. My partner helped me to build it with whatever we had in our garage. So it's kind of made with wasted the parts that supposed to be deposited. A partner could sell it for their metals or for the waste of them, maybe use them for something else. So uh, it's funny that we go back to this idea of like hoarding, like the things that is free and accessible, and we don't throw them away, and we keep them for another purpose. One day, maybe, we don't know, but we just hoard them for that one day. And it's interesting that we come back to this conversation tonight, because the machine is also was made out of hoarded pieces and wasted parts. And it's, I had the vision of it, the visual part of it, and I asked him to help me to build it. And I was like certain about the hydraulic energy that I want to use. It should have been with the power of liquid, because it's a material that is also in common with our body. We can't hold the liquid. We have to go to the bathroom. It's functioning in our body as well, in our everyday life. And I wanted that machine works with the air pump and the liquid as well, things that our body is working with. And also the title of a speeding machine was something that it's very human. We speed on things. So that kind of human aspect to that. So we built that. It works with the air pump and air pressure, and spray water based on the timer that we set it to. And and the thing for the wasting technique is that the machine is always on. It never get unplugged, it never turn off. So if the duration of almost 2 months of the exhibition, the machine is always on and ready to do the work, which is spitting or squirting liquid once a day. So that's the story behind the machine.
Was it difficult to build? Like, was it quite a learning process for you and your partner?
For me, it was. For my partners, his job is in as an HVAC, so he works with the machine and has the knowledge to build lots of them. But the difficult part for him was to build something that he said is not functional. Like for me, it is a function. Like I wanted to squirt water a certain time, and that's the function. But for him as a technician, it was not functional enough, and that was the hardest part for him.
Did you have a diagram for it? And did it end up looking like the diagram if you did?
I had an image in my mind. I don't have exact diagrams for it, but the imaginary pattern files that they make for these stupid machines on the drawings, on the acetate and stuff, there is a lot to them that they are squirting liquids. Could be different sort of liquids, or they're leaking, or something is non-functional, or there is that leakage or squirting or spraying water. It's happening to the diagrams of the machine that you used to draw, and I'm drawing. And it was first time that I really wanted to. It was in a conversation with a friend that she was like, okay, why don't you make them? I said, well, I don't know. And so make them. So that was like the first attempt of making a machine close to the diagrams that I tried to draw. I can't really tell invent, but yeah, it happened through the process of drawing. So I guess the idea of like squirting or speeding was from the drawings.
Aileen, you mentioned to me that in your visual interest or your artistic interest in Persian miniatures, there was a convention of representing, I think, like people with their heads cut off and blood gushing out, and I believe like there was even a technical term for it that you told me that I've since forgotten. But yeah, but I'd love to hear more about that, as you know, as we see, you know, this gushing both in the diagrams that seem to be about resource extraction in the drawing itself, and then this machine that, yeah, that returns fire on, or I guess returns some kind of spraying at those machines.
Sure. There might have been a term for it, but I don't know the exact term for that technique. But I'll show you the images. I actually thought that we might need to, so let me share my screen back here. And then, okay, so Godfre is talking about, so in traditional Persian miniature or a painting, there are a very common scenery, the war scenes, and they're ordered and sponsored by the king, mostly the king who usually have won the war. And the order, okay, painters in the library, paint that scenery of the war that we won our enemy, and we're gonna give that book or that picture to our enemy as a gift. So, and there is lots of bloody scenes, and like they are beheaded. There's lots of beheading scene, or like cutting pieces of body. This is another one. And maybe I stop sharing them. Maybe I leave them on here. So what is interesting for me in these images, it has, you might think that it has nothing to do with wasting technique, but what's happening through these images, it's a moment that the body has been injured, it's been beheaded, so, but the body is still alive and the blood is running. It's a very different experience if you could see the actual image in person. Maybe that's why the materiality of the image is so important for me, because it does something quite different to our senses, to our body. I was, I think, 14 or 15-year-old when, for my first and only time, I had the opportunity to see these miniatures in person in a museum in Tehran. And the way that they could the blood was depicted in this moment and the war scene was very real, and it was very shocking, and it was very weird. So there is something stick to my mind. It's just a feeling, but I thinking about that. I can't even say gesture, but the beheaded body, but that moment that the body is dead and alive at the same time. And thinking about the machine as a way of governmenting, or as a way that they govern things. And thinking about how these processes start from almost 2009, when we were dealing with this suppression. So this kind of relationship between people, government, what's going on, and the quality of our life. We were like live and dead at the same time. Like there was something through that. So the depiction of the blood squirting out of the wings, and thinking about the machines or the dyes that were available to me, and they were capable and welcoming for me to do anything that I want to them. That was the start of, I think, those process. So I'm not necessarily working with the blood or beheaded people, but this is the notion of functioning and not functioning. Functioning but not doing anything, functioning but I'm like it's leaking, it's about to explode and doing a disaster. So that's kind of moment of disaster, I could tell. um, it's something that I'm kind of working on them in my drawing process when I'm working with the diagrams. But um, yeah, there is not necessarily a direct relationship to the traditional Persian painting, but it's the notion. I can tell it's the notion of functioning and not functioning, thinking and not being able to think.
We just had some people come through the gallery looking at your work there, and they were quite impressed with the process of you going through all that work to put that drawing together just to undo it. They were very fascinated by that.
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's exactly undoing it. Like it is the drawing washing away, but I don't see it as undoing necessarily. It's just I would see it as another layer.
Mhm.
Um,
Making something new, perhaps.
uh, yeah, in a way, like new in a way, uh, a newer mark, maybe as something that's been shaped or left behind.
Actually, yeah, the puddle at the bottom, when I come in, usually it's dried by the next day. So it is making like this new mark making like on a different part of the drawing. It doesn't stay like as a wet puddle, which is interesting.
I'm just curious what it looks like what it looks like as the solution, or the, I guess it's not just water, the solution, as it goes down and it sort of puddles, like how big is that puddle? Or I guess how much is added to it each time? Because I can't really tell from seeing it on the screen.
I would say like a cup of water,
Oh, wow.
maybe like it's like a quick squirt. Is Mojan, does that sound about right? Maybe a cup?
Yeah, it's not like a huge puddle. I can show you guys if you want. You take my computer.
Yeah, let's do field trip
Cool,
to the
yes.
gallery.
Can you guys see it?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
Yeah.
not huge, but yeah, you can see the different mark making that's happening.
Yeah,
And
it's that inky pile on the floor that's quite dark.
And is it eventually going to get big enough that it's, it's going to mark up your actual floor?
No, the mylar goes down far enough to where like it's going to catch any water that drips or falls off the back. So yeah, that's not really a concern. It was something we thought about definitely the first few days, but it hasn't been an issue whatsoever.
The other thing that kind of did in the installation, that the work is not, the acetate is not flat, it's a little bit curved. So it's kind of hold the spray and kind of lay it down. So it doesn't really make the floor wet, but it's kind of has these drips.
There's also some, if you see on the side, you can see that light, those caustics coming off of it as well. So just that kind of on the top of it, just the light is kind of refracting off of it. And it's an interesting thing too. There's a bit of a fan in the gallery, so there's always a little bit of a ripple. And so you've always got this the caustics kind of moving. So there's always a bit of movement to it besides the water as well, which is really nice.
And it's been less than 2 weeks. Like if we like count the days, it's less than like 14 days. So my assumption is that at the end of like the period of the installation, a certain part of the drawing will be completely washed off. So.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very slow. It is very slow.
And can you just clarify again what was the illustration done with? It was a charcoal?
It was water soluble pencil.
Water soluble pencil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always I think about government a lot actually. It's been a big part of my practice personally, and I worked for years in government, and this idea of repetition has always come up as around government, and this idea of feeding the machine and to kind of keep that mechanism of government always going. And so hearing you talk about government and this idea of it repeating every day, and that's kind of where my mind went a little bit, and this kind of the rational versus the irrational, tactics versus strategies, and just different ways of looking at the process that's going on. And so yeah, it was interesting just to hear that kind of side of it, and that kind of influence or context of the work. And I don't really have a question or anything, because I know you have talked a bit about government already in it, and just what that's been. But just wanted to bring that up. For me too, in the gallery, I know Godfre, you did mention the idea of the sound through the recordings that you've listened to, and that's something that else has kind of come through. And even this idea of like filtration and separation, and like sometimes I'll have the live stream going on in the office, and I can hear someone in the gallery, and then it's like a second later it's on the screen and it sounds different, so it's been through this computer filter. And it's a really interesting filtration of the work. So just kind of picking up some of your language and how we can experience it in the gallery in different ways, and it just provides such a different experience of it. I always go back and forth from the office to the gallery a lot. Just, yeah. Yeah, so once again, not really any questions, but just thought I'd, share some of my own observations. Yeah, we have like 4 minutes left. So maybe we'll just see if there's any questions that any of the participants have at all, or if there's any last questions. If people want to just put them in the chat window at all, or Mojan, if you have any last questions as well. Or Godfrey, yeah. And then I also am curious, you know, just the language too around spitting, and you talked about that being something that's really like referring to a human, this idea of spitting. And I've been, you know, I've been using the language of spitting, but I've also been using the language of washing as well. And yeah, no, so anyways, I'm just thinking this has given me a lot to think about in terms of this, and just like particular processes, and just the thoughtful nature of everything that's in this work. And just the, it's been a joy to have it at the gallery, and to really just have this daily event that goes on that really it's had this weird effect of just bringing a little bit of like random joy to the gallery as well, in terms of like um, people who may come in who may not necessarily know the art context of the work, or might just be passing through the RCA and come in, and there's this spitting machine, and it just brings people a lot of it's just a relief, you know, from the everyday thoughts, COVIDness, everything that's going on. People come in, they have like their minute of like relief to watch this spit, and then they go on their day-to-day routines. And so I'm excited to just see how that kind of builds, and the audience daily kind of builds with the work, and as it kind of like makes its way out into the community a bit more.
Thanks, Melody. You actually brought very interesting points and stuff, but I kind of like, I wasn't even like fully conscious about this contradiction between like spitting and washing. Like these are completely different and opposite. But it's also remind me that one of the way of damaging images of, let's say, we're talking about icons in a period of time, that depiction of the icons or the portrait of holy people weren't allowed on the books or illustration of the books. And in that specific period of history, in Middle East, they used to like use the mouth water and make it wet and kind of wash or disturb the face, kind of deform it. So that was another stalking thing, like a way of damaging or kind of breaking the image, was to actually use the mouth water or body fluid to damage that picture. So that was that. And also like, yeah, like the act of spitting is like human does it to dehumiliate something, to kind of devalue something. So I was aware of all this reference, and I was thinking about it, to have a machine to does this job, this stupid function.
Yeah, it's kind of a like it's almost like a crude word, you know. He's like, oh, to what, you know, to, like you said, the act of spitting, and yeah, I like how, yeah, there's a lot to unpack with that, I guess, too. Just but anyways, we are at 6 o'clock, so that hour went by way too fast. It was lovely to have Aileen, and it was lovely to have you too, Godfrey, to have this conversation and to share more about wasting techniques. Thank you for everyone who joined us. If you want to check out wasting techniques, you can do so either at the Alternator during gallery hours, or if you are not in Kelowna, you can do so online. You can go to alternatorcentre.com, and there's a link there to wasting techniques, and you can check out either of the 2 Zoom links that are available to watch through during gallery hours. So that's 11 to 6 Tuesdays through Fridays, or Saturdays 11 to 4. And if you have any other questions about the Alternator or Aileen's work, or for Godfre, you can certainly send them to us at info@alternatorcentre.com, and I'll pass that on. And we will make sure that they make them onto Aileen and Godfre. And once again, thank you so much. Our next Alternator chat is the last of the series, and that is doing your taxes as an artist. So we're going to have the Alternator's long-serving board treasurer, Kathy Chin, is going to be joining us. And she's an accountant that focuses on taxes. And so we can ask her any questions that we want. It's free, it's open to the public, and yeah, right in time for tax season. So maybe we'll see you next week. Once again, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.